10 days after her divorce became final, Claire Miller saw a photograph of her ex-husband's wedding and laughed. It was a small sound, almost involuntary, and it surprised even her. There was nothing funny about Julian Vance standing barefoot on a white beach in the Maldives with his arm around another woman. There was nothing funny about the cream-colored tuxedo, the tables covered in white orchids, or the caption he had written beneath the photograph for everyone they knew to see. I finally found a woman who truly belongs in my world. 10 years of marriage had apparently required only 10 days to replace, but Claire was not laughing at Julian. She was staring at his bride. Because 6 years earlier, Claire had seen that woman's face in a confidential investigation involving false identities, wealthy investors, and money that had vanished across 3 countries. The bride's name, according to Julian, was Isabella Laurent. Claire knew her as Charlotte Briggs. And when Claire zoomed in on the photograph and saw the tiny pale scar behind the woman's right ear, the last possibility of coincidence disappeared. Same scar, same woman, different life. Claire lowered the phone. For several seconds, the only sound in her new apartment was rain ticking against the window. Half her belongings were still inside cardboard boxes. One box contained kitchen glasses wrapped in old newspapers. Another held professional books she had not opened since leaving the art risk industry. On the counter sat a chipped blue coffee mug that Julian had always hated because it did not match anything else in their expensive kitchen. Claire had taken it with her anyway. It was one of the few objects in the apartment that felt unquestionably hers. Her phone vibrated again. The first message had come from Natalie, a former colleague. "Claire, I don't know whether I should send you this." The second had arrived less than a minute later. "I'm sorry." Then came the wedding link. Claire opened it again. Julian looked exactly as she expected him to look, pleased with himself, his shoulders pulled back slightly, his smile wider than necessary. During the final years of their marriage, Claire had learned that Julian smiled differently when a camera was present. Around ordinary people, his smile was relaxed. Around wealthy people, it became an announcement. "Look at me, I belong here too." Beside him stood Isabella Laurent, the supposed only daughter of a Swiss hotel family, educated in Paris, raised between Geneva and Monaco, now managing what Julian described publicly as her family's European art portfolio. The biography sounded almost too perfect. 6 months earlier, Claire might have dismissed the feeling. Now she opened her laptop. Old habits returned before she consciously decided to use them. She moved the lamp away from the screen to eliminate glare. She opened 2 browser windows. She downloaded the highest resolution wedding photograph she could find instead of relying on the compressed social media version. Then she enlarged the bride's face. Eyes, jawline, hairline, ear. Claire stopped. The scar was barely visible beneath Isabella's dark hair, a thin, curved mark behind the right ear, no longer than Claire's thumbnail. She remembered it immediately, not because scars interested her, because details did. For 9 years, Claire had worked in risk assessment for high-value art and antiquities transactions. Her job had never been to decide whether a painting was beautiful. Her job had been to notice the thing everyone else wanted to ignore, a date that did not match, an ownership record appearing 6 months too late, an insurance document using language from the wrong jurisdiction, a photograph with the wrong frame, a signature that leaned 2 degrees farther to the left than it should. Claire used to joke that people paid her to be professionally suspicious. Julian had once loved that about her. Later, he called it negativity. Claire crossed the apartment to the narrow cabinet delivered that morning. The bottom drawer was stiff. She pulled twice before it opened. Inside sat an old gray archive box she had almost thrown away during the move. She carried it to the floor. The smell of paper and dust made her think of London offices, late-night coffee and conference rooms where nervous men tried to sound calm while discussing 7-figure losses. Claire sorted through folders. Mendoza, Rosenfeld, Astor Holdings. Then her fingers stopped. Briggs, Charlotte. Claire opened it. The photograph clipped inside was older. Charlotte's hair had been shorter and lighter then. Her nose looked slightly different. Her lips had not yet been altered, but the eyes were unmistakable. And behind the right ear was the same scar. Claire sat back against the sofa. Charlotte Briggs had never been convicted of anything in the case Claire remembered. That distinction mattered to Claire, even now. She did not invent conclusions where evidence stopped. But Charlotte's name had appeared near too many disasters to be comfortable. A private party in London, a newly wealthy businessman, an introduction to an exclusive investment vehicle, a consulting company with almost no operating history, money transferred through multiple jurisdictions. Then nothing. In Claire's old case, a collection of rare gemstones had disappeared from private storage while the ownership structure around them became so complicated that investigators spent months determining who had actually controlled what. Charlotte had never been standing in the center of the paperwork. She never was. She stood one step away, sometimes two. Claire had once warned a client against transferring nearly $4 million into a company Charlotte had introduced. The client had been furious with Claire for 3 days. Then another investor lost almost everything. Afterward, he sent Claire a bottle of wine and a handwritten note. "You were the only person in the room willing to tell me I was being stupid." Claire had kept the note for years. She wondered where it was now. Her gaze returned to Julian's wedding photograph. He looked genuinely happy. That bothered her more than she expected, not because she wanted him miserable, because she understood exactly what Charlotte had offered him. For the last 3 years of their marriage, Julian had wanted something more desperately than money. Recognition. He wanted old money people to treat him as though he had always belonged among them. He wanted collectors in London to remember his name. He wanted invitations to dinners where nobody posted photographs. He wanted access to rooms that could not be bought simply by paying for a ticket. Claire had watched the hunger grow. Apparently, Isabella Laurent had arrived carrying the key to every door Julian believed had been closed to him. Claire closed Charlotte's file. She could have called Julian. His number was still memorized despite the fact she had deleted it. Instead, she opened the public records connected to Vance Art Capital. Julian's fund appeared on the screen. Claire began with the most recent filings. Then she stopped. A transfer 4 months earlier was larger than expected. Another appeared 2 weeks later. Then collateral records, a trust, an unfamiliar consulting entity. Claire leaned closer. The strange sensation she felt was not satisfaction. It was the same feeling she used to have at work when she discovered that one bad document was connected to 5 others. The first anomaly was rarely the danger. The pattern was. She reached for the notebook beside her laptop. It was an ordinary black notebook, the kind Claire had bought in packs of 3 for years. Julian used to tease her for keeping handwritten notes when everything could be stored digitally. Claire had always answered the same way. "Writing slows me down enough to notice what I'm thinking." She wrote one company name, then another. Within 20 minutes, the wedding photograph no longer seemed like the most dangerous thing she had found that afternoon. 4 months before the divorce, a large portion of Vance Art Capital's working capital had been moved through a recently created art consulting company. From there, the funds traveled into a trust registered in the Cayman Islands. A few weeks afterward, Julian pledged 3 major paintings as security for a new loan. Claire recognized 2 of them immediately. One was a 17th-century Dutch work Julian had purchased after spending 6 months negotiating the price. The night the acquisition closed, he had opened champagne in their kitchen at nearly 2 a.m. Claire had been barefoot, eating leftover noodles from the carton, while Julian talked excitedly about what the painting would mean for his reputation. That memory landed differently now. Another month passed in the transaction history. 2 Renaissance works joined the collateral package. Claire put down her pen. 5 paintings. Those were not decorative assets. They were the spine of Julian's fund. Investors trusted Vance Art Capital partly because those works gave the portfolio credibility. If the associated debt failed, Julian would not simply lose liquidity. He could lose the collection that made the company worth trusting in the first place. Claire stared at the screen. Then she understood something else. Julian had fought surprisingly hard during the divorce to preserve complete control over his company. At the time, Claire had assumed it was ego. Now she suspected someone had given that ego direction. The memory of the lawyer's office returned. It had been a Wednesday afternoon. Claire remembered because on Wednesdays the flower shop downstairs received fresh lilies, and the scent followed her all the way into the elevator. Julian was already sitting at the conference table when she entered. He wore the navy suit she had helped him choose years earlier for his first serious meeting with a New York collector. Claire noticed that immediately. She noticed stupid things on difficult days, a loose thread at the edge of Julian's cuff, a water ring beneath his lawyer's glass. The wall clock ticking louder than seemed reasonable. On the table sat the divorce agreement. Julian pushed it toward her. The terms are generous. Claire almost smiled. Generous. The apartment remained with Julian. His fund remained entirely under his control. The artworks registered through the business remained untouched. Claire received enough cash to rebuild her life comfortably, but almost none of the assets she had helped him accumulate. To someone seeing only the document, Julian had won. Perhaps that was why he kept watching her while she read. He was waiting for a reaction. Claire gave him none. 10 years earlier, Julian had owned a small gallery that barely covered its expenses. Claire had been the person with the stable career. She introduced him to an insurance specialist when he began handling more expensive work. She put him in touch with a provenance attorney. She warned him away from a forged certificate that would have cost him more money than he had. She sat beside him at their tiny kitchen table while he rehearsed his first investor presentation. Back then, Julian sometimes reached across the table, squeezed her hand and said, "When this works, it'll be because you saw things I couldn't." Claire had believed him. Years later, when the money arrived, the sentence changed. "You always see problems. Then, you're too cautious. Then, you don't understand how people at this level think." Eventually, Julian began leaving the room to answer certain calls. Business trips stretched an extra night. A hotel charge appeared in a city he had never mentioned visiting. Once, Claire smelled unfamiliar perfume on the inside of his jacket. She did not confront him. Not immediately. Claire had spent most of her professional life learning that when you suspected fraud, accusing someone too early rarely gave you more truth. Mostly, it taught them what to hide. But by the time Julian handed her the divorce papers, Claire no longer needed evidence. She only needed to understand what kind of man she was married to. Julian leaned back. "We want different lives now." Claire turned another page. "My world has changed." She looked up. That seemed to encourage him. "There are expectations, Claire. Private auctions, Europe, investors. People notice who you bring into a room." There it was, the sentence beneath the sentence. Claire waited. Julian finally said it. "You're an obstacle now." His voice remained calm. "Your background is too ordinary. You can't walk into the circles I'm entering and expect people to see you the way I need them to." For several seconds, Claire felt nothing. Then something inside her settled. Not broke. Settled. Because Julian believed every word. He had rewritten their marriage until his success belonged entirely to him, and Claire had become an embarrassing artifact from a smaller version of his life. She picked up the pen. Julian looked almost confused. "You're signing?" Claire signed the first tab, then the second, then the third. When she finished, she put the pen down. Julian stared at her. "You're really not going to fight me for any of it?" Claire gathered her copy of the agreement. At the door, she looked back. "Not everything you managed to keep is an asset, Julian." He smiled. He thought she was trying to sound mysterious because she had lost. 10 days later, sitting among half-open boxes in her new apartment, Claire finally understood the irony. Julian had not merely insisted on keeping his wealth, he had consolidated it, and someone had already positioned herself beside him to receive it. Claire returned to the financial records. The offshore structure was called Aurelia Heritage Partnership. She searched the corporate registration. 2 controlling beneficiaries appeared. Julian Vance, Isabella Laurent. Claire stared at the second name. There it was. The connection. Not theoretical, not emotional, documented. She began verifying Isabella's public biography. No matching record from the Paris institution Julian had mentioned. No Laurent family controlling the Swiss hotel group in his interviews. The luxury hotels existed. The family existed. Isabella did not belong to them. Claire opened the bride's social media photographs one by one. At first, they looked convincing. Isabella beside a vintage Ferrari in Monaco. Isabella entering a charity gala in London. Isabella drinking champagne on the terrace of a hotel in Geneva, Isabella beside a well-known investor in Paris, but Claire had spent years separating ownership from proximity. A photograph beside a car proved access to a parking space. A photograph inside a hotel proved entry through a door. Standing beside an investor for 12 seconds at a public event did not make him your business partner. Charlotte had not fabricated an entire world. She had done something smarter. She had borrowed pieces of a real one. Claire rubbed her thumb along the edge of the notebook. A sentence from the London file came back to her. Charlotte did not steal from reckless men. She chose confident ones, especially the newly wealthy. Men who had enough money to enter elite spaces, but not enough experience to know which signals of status actually mattered. She gave them exactly what they were desperate to believe about themselves: that they had been noticed, that they had been selected, that they finally belonged. Then she introduced the opportunity: exclusive, private, limited. The victim moved the money himself. Julian was almost embarrassingly perfect. Claire checked the trust documents again. Then another file caught her attention: the Renaissance collection. Almost all of it had been pledged. Claire's hand stopped. She knew Julian. He would never have done that a year earlier. Those paintings were the part of his portfolio he treated almost superstitiously. He once told Claire they were untouchable, his foundation, his proof that the business was permanent. So what had changed? Claire could almost hear the conversation Charlotte must have created. Your wife will come after the fund. You need a structure she cannot reach. Move the liquidity. Protect the paintings. Separate the assets. Trust me. Julian would have loved the language. It turned greed into strategy. It turned betrayal into self-defense. And, most importantly, it allowed him to believe he was smarter than Claire. Her phone vibrated. An electronic invitation appeared. Vance Art Capital Private Collection Evening, introducing Isabella Laurent Vance to collectors, investors, and partners. Friday, 7:30 p.m. Claire read it twice. She almost deleted it. Then she noticed the guest list preview. Several people she knew professionally would be there. One was Martin Reeves, a retired collector who had once told Claire never to trust a man who described himself as self-made before dessert. Another was Elaine Porter, an attorney who had worked on 2 complicated provenance disputes with Claire. Claire looked at Charlotte's photograph. She could send the old file to Julian. She could send it anonymously. She could contact people from the London investigation. Instead, she clicked accept. It was not revenge. At least Claire did not think it was. She wanted to see Charlotte in a room where the false identity mattered. More than that, she wanted Charlotte to look at her and understand that someone else could see the seams. Friday evening arrived with unusually clear skies. The exhibition occupied the upper floor of a glass building overlooking downtown Seattle. Julian had chosen the venue carefully. The skyline was visible behind the paintings. The wine was expensive without being recognizable to most guests, and each artwork had enough empty wall around it to suggest importance. Julian had always understood presentation. That was part of why he succeeded. Claire arrived 15 minutes late. Not dramatically late, just late enough to avoid the receiving line. She wore a dark green dress she had owned for 4 years. Julian once told her it was too plain for a fundraiser in Manhattan. Claire had always liked it. At the entrance, Martin Reeves recognized her first. "Claire?" She smiled. "Hello, Martin." He looked toward Julian, then back at Claire. His eyebrows rose almost imperceptibly. Martin had always been good at asking questions without opening his mouth. "Interesting evening," he said. "So far." Claire continued inside. Julian spotted her before she reached the main gallery. His expression changed for less than a second, enough for Claire to see it. Then came the polished smile. He walked over carrying a glass of wine. "I didn't think you'd actually come." His voice was loud enough for 2 couples nearby to hear. Claire glanced around. That would make accepting the invitation unusual. Julian's smile tightened. He looked toward the center of the room where Isabella stood, speaking to an older investor. "Maybe you wanted to see how a real lady handles this world." The cruelty was deliberate. Claire knew Julian well enough to understand why. He needed Isabella to be proof that leaving Claire had been an upgrade. Without that contrast, the story he had told himself became less satisfying. Several people nearby went quiet. Claire looked at him. I came because my old profession made me interested in collections with unusually high levels of risk. For the first time that evening, Julian stopped smiling. Claire walked past him. Charlotte had already seen her. She hid it well. Almost. Her posture remained elegant. Her smile did not disappear. She continued speaking with the investor beside her, but the fingers around her champagne glass tightened. Claire noticed the white pressure at the knuckles. Charlotte remembered her. That interested Claire. They had never formally met during the London investigation. Apparently Charlotte had studied the people studying her. Claire stopped 3 feet away. Julian caught up. Isabella, this is Claire. Claire looked directly at the bride. Hello, Charlotte Briggs. Nothing in the room visibly changed. Yet, for the 3 people standing there, everything did. Charlotte did not blink. Julian frowned. Claire let the silence remain for 1 second longer. Then she said, quietly, I've always wondered what happened after the London gemstone case. The color left Charlotte's face. Not dramatically, just enough. Her glass tilted. A thin line of champagne spilled over her fingers. Julian turned. Isabella? Charlotte recovered. I'm sorry. I think you have me confused with somebody else. Claire nodded. I remember you saying something similar in one of the interview summaries. Julian looked from one woman to the other. What is she talking about? Charlotte ignored him. That was her first mistake. Claire stepped slightly closer. Does Julian know where the proceeds from the pledged paintings went after they entered Aurelia Heritage Partnership? Charlotte's eyes changed. There. Fear. Small, fast, and unmistakable. Claire knew she had found the nerve. Charlotte lowered her voice. You should be very careful making accusations you can't prove. I agree. Claire's answer came instantly. That's why I brought documents instead of accusations. Charlotte looked toward Claire's handbag. Claire saw the calculation begin. How much did she know? Who else knew? Had anything been submitted? Could the structure still be moved? Julian lost patience. Would somebody tell me what the hell is happening? Claire finally looked at him. For 1 second she considered explaining everything. Then she remembered the lawyer's office. Too ordinary. An obstacle. You cannot walk with me into my world. Claire turned back to Charlotte. You have 24 hours. Charlotte's expression hardened. For what? To decide how much worse you want this to become, Claire continued. If the old files and the current transfers belong to 2 unrelated people, you'll have nothing to worry about. If they don't, I assume the appropriate people will find the connection interesting. Julian stepped between them. That's enough. Claire looked at him. You're disrupting my event. No, Julian. Her voice remained almost gentle. I think your event was disrupted before I arrived. His jaw tightened. Claire left. She did not turn around. That night, for the first time since leaving their home, Claire slept without waking at 3 a.m. At 5:42 a.m. Her phone rang. Unknown number. Claire stared at it and let it stop. 30 seconds later it rang again. Then a message appeared. Claire, call me. Julian. She put the phone face down. At 6:11 another message came. Who is Charlotte Briggs? At 6:28. Isabella is gone. Claire sat up. The apartment was still dark. She walked to the kitchen and made coffee, not because she wanted to torture Julian, because she needed 5 minutes before allowing his emergency to become hers. The blue chipped mug sat beside the sink. Claire filled it. At 6:41, Julian called again. This time she answered. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Julian sounded different when he finally did. No performance. No carefully controlled confidence. Where is she? I don't know. What did you do? Claire closed her eyes. There it was. Even now. What did I do? You threatened her. I told her I knew who she was. You scared her into leaving. Claire looked toward the window as dawn began turning the glass pale. Check the Aurelia accounts, Julian. Silence. Then, what? Check the accounts. He hung up. Claire stood in the kitchen with her coffee. 9 minutes passed. The phone rang again. Julian did not say hello. 2 transfers. Claire sat down. How much? 3.8 million. His breathing became uneven. There's another pending transaction. Call the bank. I already did. Call your attorneys. I did. Then call the lender holding the paintings. Julian was silent. Claire understood why. He had not wanted to call them. Calling would make the situation real. Julian. The loan has a covenant tied to the fund's liquidity. Claire knew. Of course it did. If our liquidity falls below the required level, they can demand additional security. And if you can't provide it? Another silence. They can accelerate the loan. Claire looked at the steam rising from her mug and take the collection. Yes. It was the smallest she had ever heard him sound. Claire did not enjoy it. That surprised her. For months she had imagined that if Julian ever understood what he had done to her, she would feel vindicated. Instead, she felt tired. He said, "You knew. I suspected. You knew who she was. I recognized her 10 days after you divorced me." Julian breathed out slowly. "You could have called." Claire said nothing. "You could have warned me." "I could have." The anger arrived then. His old defense. "You let this happen." Claire set the mug down. "No." Her voice became firmer. "Do not do that." "Claire, I didn't move your money. I didn't pledge your paintings. I didn't create Aurelia. I didn't tell you to hide assets from your wife. I didn't invent Isabella Laurent." Julian stopped speaking. "You signed every document yourself." "That's not fair." Claire almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because Julian had spent 10 years turning fairness into something that only mattered once he needed it. "You wanted complete control of the fund. You know why?" "Yes." Claire paused. "You thought I was the threat." Silence again. That sentence hurt him more than anything else. Claire knew because it was true. Julian finally asked, "Can you help me?" There it was. The question Claire had not known she was waiting for. 10 years earlier, Julian would have asked without hesitation. "Claire, can you look at this?" "Claire, does this certificate seem wrong?" "Claire, I don't understand this contract." Then success taught him to believe needing Claire meant he was less impressive. Now the question had returned. Claire looked around her apartment. Cardboard boxes, cheap temporary curtains, the blue mug, her books. For the first time, none of it looked like evidence of what she had lost. It looked like space. "I can send you the public records I found," she said. Julian exhaled sharply with relief. "And the Charlotte file?" "No, Claire. That file was confidential work. You'll need an attorney to obtain whatever can legally be obtained. But you know the case. Yes, then help me." Claire waited. Julian lowered his voice. "Please." She had almost never heard him say that word during the last 2 years of their marriage. Claire felt something inside her loosen. Not forgiveness, not love, just the final removal of an old obligation. "I already helped you once," she said. "What does that mean?" "It means I spent years telling you when something didn't make sense. Eventually you decided caution made me ordinary." Julian did not answer. Claire continued. "I will send you the records that are public. After that, this belongs to you." "You're really going to leave me with this?" Claire looked at the gray morning outside. "No, Julian, you left yourself with this." She ended the call. The next 48 hours moved quickly. Julian's attorneys obtained emergency restrictions on one pending transfer, but the earlier money had already moved through another account. The lender demanded updated financial information. 2 investors requested immediate meetings. The exhibition photographs, which Julian had expected to circulate as proof of his rise into another level of society, disappeared from his social accounts by Saturday afternoon. Isabella Laurent's accounts disappeared with them. Her photographs vanished. Her biography vanished. The Swiss hotel heiress ceased to exist as quickly as she had been created. Charlotte Briggs was harder to erase. By Monday, Claire received an email from Elaine Porter. "You may be contacted regarding a matter involving Vance Art Capital. Call me before speaking to anyone formally." Claire smiled at the screen. Elaine had always written messages as though words cost money. Claire called her. She provided only what she could legally provide. No embellishment. No revenge. No anonymous leaking. No dramatic social media post. When Elaine asked why Claire had attended the exhibition, Claire thought for a moment. I wanted to know whether she would recognize me. And did she? Yes. Elaine paused. That must have been satisfying. Claire looked at the box containing Charlotte's old file. Less than I expected. Weeks passed. Julian did not lose everything overnight. Real financial collapse was rarely cinematic. There was no single morning when every account reached zero and every painting disappeared from the walls. Instead, consequences arrived in pieces: legal fees, frozen transactions, investor withdrawals, emergency negotiations, collateral reviews, a planned acquisition canceled. A lender taking control of 2 works while restructuring discussions continued. Then another. Claire heard most of it indirectly. Seattle's art world was not large enough for a story like Julian's to remain private. She never called to ask for updates. One evening, almost 2 months after the wedding photograph, Julian appeared outside Claire's apartment building. Claire saw him through the glass before opening the door. He was not wearing a suit. He looked older. Not ruined. Just stripped of the careful polish he had spent years building. Claire stepped outside rather than inviting him in. Julian looked past her toward the lobby. So this is where you live? For now. He nodded. For a while, neither spoke. Finally, he said, they recovered part of the money. Claire waited. Not all of it, I assumed. We may save the fund. That's good. Julian looked at her, almost irritated by the sincerity. I lost 3 paintings. Claire knew which ones without asking. I'm sorry. He laughed once, bitterly. You actually mean that? Yes. I don't understand you. That was always part of the problem. Julian looked down. Then he said, Charlotte knew everything. Claire frowned slightly. Everything about what? About us. About the divorce. About what I thought you might ask for. Claire felt cold despite the mild evening. How? I told her. Of course, Julian continued. She kept saying you would destroy the fund if I let you near it, that you would take half because you were angry, that wealthy families protected assets differently. Claire said nothing. She made me feel like moving everything was sophisticated. Julian looked at her. I thought I was protecting myself from you. I know. That answer seemed to hurt more than accusation would have. He looked toward the street. On the street I called you ordinary. Yes. I said you didn't understand people like her. Yes, Julian gave a humorless smile, and she chose me because I didn't. Claire let the words remain between them. That was the lesson. Not that Charlotte was smarter than Julian. Not even that Claire was smarter. Charlotte had simply found the part of Julian that wanted something badly enough to stop questioning it. Prestige, access, proof. She had sold him a version of himself he desperately wanted to purchase. Julian put his hands into his pockets. I keep thinking about what you said at the lawyer's office. Claire knew before he repeated it. Not everything you manage to keep is an asset. Claire looked at him. I wasn't predicting this. I know. I was talking about us. Julian's expression changed. For the first time, he seemed to understand the sentence completely. He had fought for the apartment, the company, the paintings, the shares, the accounts, the things he could list. And while protecting them, he had treated the person who helped him build them as disposable. Then he had nearly lost the possessions anyway. Julian nodded once. I know that now. Claire expected an apology. Part of her wanted one. Instead, Julian said something more honest. I don't know when I became that person. Claire considered him. Yes, you do. He looked at her. You just didn't dislike him while he was winning. Julian had no answer. They stood quietly for another moment. Then he asked, Do you think there was ever a point when you would have taken me back? Claire did not need time to think. Before you met Charlotte? Yes. No. The answer surprised him. Claire continued, Charlotte didn't end our marriage, Julian. She arrived after you had already decided I was something you needed to outgrow. His face tightened. You were just the last person to realize what that decision cost. Claire opened the lobby door. Julian remained on the sidewalk. Claire. She looked back. I am sorry. This time the words were simple. No explanation. No qualification. Claire nodded. Thank you. She went inside. She did not forgive him on the spot. She did not return to him. She did not stand behind the glass waiting to see whether he walked away looking broken. Instead, she climbed the stairs because the elevator was temporarily out of service, entered her apartment, and reheated the soup she had forgotten to eat earlier. It was an ordinary evening. Claire found that she liked ordinary evenings now. 3 months later, she accepted a consulting assignment from an old colleague involving authenticity and transaction risk reviews for a small group of private collectors. It was supposed to last 6 weeks. The work expanded. One client recommended another. Claire bought a better desk. She unpacked the final cardboard box. At the bottom, she found the handwritten note from the investor she had protected 6 years earlier. You were the only person in the room willing to tell me I was being stupid. Claire laughed. She pinned it to the small corkboard beside her desk, not as proof that she had always been right. Claire knew better than that. Nobody was always right. She kept it because it reminded her of something Julian had forgotten and Claire herself had nearly forgotten during the last years of their marriage. Value did not become smaller because someone failed to recognize it. Sometimes the people most obsessed with appearing sophisticated were simply the easiest people to deceive. Sometimes the quiet person in the room saw more because she was not busy trying to be seen. And sometimes revenge was unnecessary. Claire had not destroyed Julian's world. She had not needed to. He had chosen the illusion himself. The expensive wedding, the borrowed status, the perfect heiress, the financial structure that promised protection. Each decision had looked like an asset when he placed it into his hands. Only later had he discovered the cost of holding on. If you had been in Claire's position, would you have warned Julian the moment you recognized Charlotte, even after he humiliated you and pushed you out of the life you helped him build? Or would you have done exactly what Claire did and allowed him to face the consequences of his own decisions? Tell us what you think in the comments, because this is the kind of choice where people rarely agree. If this story kept you watching, give the video a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more stories about betrayal, hidden truths, and the moment karma finally catches up with the people who never believed it would.